Whispering Woods continues expanding, with Genevieve Joyce forging ahead, enclosure after enclosure. Some of the staff might say she's getting ahead of herself and biting off more than she can chew, but new animals in need of a home continue to arrive at the haven. The deer and swan walkthrough is already popular despite its barren state, so the first order of business is turning a flat plain into a magical meadow. Imogen Chen confirms that the injured buck from last week is healing quickly, which means an enclosure for the red deer is in order. In the meantime, Wesley Parsons decides it's time to try his hand at some habitat design, with the arrival of the first Wisents, gifted by a zoo in Poland as part of a breeding program and a big step in the haven's conservation mission. Welcome back to Whispering Woods Wildlife Haven. Hey everyone, Sparrow here. We are picking up right where we left off last time in our walk through Deer and Swan Park. As you can see, there's quite a few guests in there already, but it's looking very, very barren. So we are going to focus on adding all of the rocks, all of the foliage, and just making sure that all of our animals are happy with their surroundings, which proves to be a little bit difficult, but more on that later. So for our pond, just up against our restaurant, I'm using a technique I've seen quite a few creators use where I make the first layer of stones and then I offset it just a little bit underneath the surface of the water. And that helps to provide a little bit more depth, and then I can just add a few more rocks all around that to make it look more natural. But it does save quite a bit of time because you are only placing the first layer and then copying the second one, which makes the time go a little bit quicker. Here we do have a more steep slope towards the water, but further over to the left we do have a shallow bank that the swans can use to get in and out of the water. I do end up making the pond slightly larger and having to get rid of a bunch of faux rocks because they were infringing on the traversable area, even though they were far below the surface, and I'm not sure why. I didn't realize their hitboxes were quite that big. So it does still look a little bit empty, the pond at least, but one thing you can do with the water is adjust the transparency. So I made it a little bit less transparent so you can't see through the water, and then it doesn't really bother me that there's not so much on the floor of the pond. And the swans like it a lot better, so really that's what we're looking for here in our challenge mode series. If you're brand new to the channel, welcome. This is just one series that's over here. We do have a few different sandbox series. 2 are complete, and I am currently in the process of planning a third one. So it looks like we will be doing an Asian themed zoo because that is what most of the votes were on my poll in my community tab. I will frequently have polls, so do make sure you check out the community tab once in a while. But yeah, that's basically all I've been up to. Haven't really been doing too much other than enjoying my summer vacation. Just got back from a lake that has the same salt content as the Dead Sea, if I'm not mistaken, but it is located in Canada, and it's kind of just like in the middle of nowhere. And it was so nice. I loved it. I loved being able to just float on the water without having to really put any effort into it because of the salt content. Seriously, such a great time. Did get a little bit sunburned, but it is what it is. Here I am using the periwinkle leaves, and I just flipped them upside down because I liked the more flat texture of the bottom of the piece rather than the tendrils that were kind of going up from the other side. So we're just going to put that around the edges of the pond, and this is going to make it look like there's a little bit of pond scum, maybe some algae floating around, although we don't really want algae in our ponds. It just kind of adds a little bit more realism. And then I'm going to put down a bunch of grass. I don't know how realistic this is because the deer would probably be grazing quite often. And then we'll also put some meadow flowers in, and just a few other details like these rocks are going to go up a steeper slope. And then planting up a bunch of trees because I want this to look a little bit like a forest grove, a little bit like a meadow. And then hopefully with the amount of tree cover, the deer won't be getting super stressed because they have places to hide, which I thought this would work, but I ended up having to do something different to actually make them less stressed. For now, I'm just picking the perfect weeping willow for this corner near the pond, and then I'm going to plant up a few of the edges with some hedges. This is a piece that I have found myself using very, very often since the release of the Barnyard Pack. Absolutely love it. It's very good for filler spaces. And there we go. This is what our meadow is looking like so far. We see the restaurant in the background, a nice tranquil space on the edge of the pond. Our deer are thriving in this meadow. They are such a great model. I love them so much, have never used them before. And our swans, of course, are also quite happy running around and swimming around. Here is our male deer. He likes to sleep a lot. I haven't actually seen him wandering around the enclosure too much. And finally, we have some nighttime shots of the lights within the restaurant. But we can't always have nice things, as evidenced by our first protesters. These guys, I don't know what you're trying to do, because they are protesting the stress of the deer, but like, you are making it worse because you're right in their space. So I'm gonna put down a few of the do not disturb signs. Be quiet didn't really help, so I added more trees, and then also used these fig trees as big bushes that I just sank into the ground. I really love the green color of these, and the nice thing about them too is that their leaves don't move in the wind, because I also used some of the yew trees as bushes, but their leaves do move in the wind, and I'm not sure if I quite like that. Thankfully, because I'm sinking them into the ground, they are still mostly traversable, and there we go. That's a lot more planted up, and I'm hoping that the animals are a little bit less stressed. But that didn't quite work, so what I ended up doing is putting up this fence towards the back of the enclosure just to section off their stable and give them a place to retreat to if they need. They do need a little bit more enrichment still, but it looks like the stress issue has been solved. Hopefully no more protesters here. Another fun function is the heat map that shows you the visibility of the animals, and you can basically change it to where the guests should be able to see the animals, where they are currently able to see the animals, and where they have historically been able to see the animals. So that's always a great way for helping to plan your enclosure as well. And with that, we are on to part 2. We are going to be building an enclosure for our red deer, which I tried putting in the walkthrough last time, but it turned out that guests will flee from them, so obviously we're not going to put them in there. We are building them their very own enclosure, and it is going to have a small viewing platform for our guests so that they can get a better view. We're going to drop in the stable from the fallow deer enclosure in here as well. We're just going to make a few adjustments so that the deer can't just hop over the fence, and add a little bit more corrugated iron and also lift it up so we don't have guests standing on the path and looking right into the stable, as they will probably do. We're going to sink the staff door into the corrugated iron just a little bit, so only the lock pad is going through, and that way the staff will have access through the back of the stable. To make sure our guests aren't wandering back here, I'm just going to put down a little bit of the staff path and then cover it up with some fallen leaves. This fence I created last time, as it was modeled off of a fence for deer that I saw an inspiration picture of somewhere on Google, I want to say. And it is just created using the European fence post, the light cable, and a small LED sign base on the bottom. And this will just go all the way around. This is going to be a relatively simple enclosure. There will be a gate at the back for vehicle access, but most of this build was focused on this viewing platform and also the foliage and rockwork for the enclosure. So this is going to be a similar style to the fence across the way where we have Twilight Mason work. We have some Indonesian stained beams. We're going to cover up the top of the rocks with that timber as well to make sure our guests are not vaulting themselves over into the enclosure. I set up these small barriers, probably just like a short metal barrier. Can always make them a bit taller if I need to. And that's just gonna go around the edges that are facing the actual enclosure. For the roof, I decided on the Arctic shingles. I thought they worked decently well. I did have to split it into 3 separate groups. Well, 6 separate groups actually, because this end part I needed to slide in. And that's just because of the beams. It wasn't quite covering them and I wanted it to go all the way across. The flooring, I didn't like any of the path textures, so I'm going to add the stained wood. And then of course we're gonna plant up a bunch of spots. I added some ivy to the wall because I thought it looked pretty. And then around the viewing platform on the deer side, I'm going to place a bunch of rocks, and that will help to make this area a little bit less traversable so that the deer maybe aren't coming right up to the edge. In the center of this enclosure, I wanted a platform of rocks that the deer could stand majestically on. So here I am building them out of the temperate rocks, just turning a bunch of the rocks this way and that. Just making sure that the sight lines are exactly where I want them. A few trees to make sure that these deer aren't getting stressed, though I'm not quite sure if they do. I have also never built for these guys. And then once all of the planting has been done, very similar to the deer park, I'm just going to make sure to terrain paint underneath. So always grass under the grass and tree portions, and then creating some trails with dirt, adding a little bit of sand in some spots for some variation, and then a little bit of rock texture underneath the main rock pile as well. To help blend the path into the soil, I'm going to use a bunch of moss decals, and I will recolor those to a brown that is as similar to the soil texture as possible. And just like that, we're on to our third build of the video, the Wisent. We will be building a rather large barn for these guys, as well as 2 paddocks so that we can have 2 males and therefore 2 breeding populations. Seeing as the story is that the Wisents are coming from a zoo in Poland and they are part of a breeding program. As Whispering Woods gets larger, they also gain a little bit more authority, not quite the words, like certification, accreditation, there we go, in the zoo world. And therefore more zoos are willing to work with them in order to help them with their mission, which is one of the big things that Wesley was gunning for in the beginning. Here again, I'm going to hide a little staff path so that our guests don't wander their way back here. And to the right here, we just have one of the staff buildings. So past that, we're going to run a road that will give us backstage access to the Wisents, as well as a small gate into the red deer enclosure. Inside the barn, I'm just modifying the same fences that were built for the deer stables. This is going to be a pretend staff access gate, and we will be making some sliding doors for the Wisents on the other side. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion about how to say the word Wisents. I actually considered just saying European bison because I wasn't sure. But thanks to a wonderful Discord that I am part of, which you can also join with a link in the description, I have a bunch of people from around the world to ask such questions to, including people who live in Germany and would know the correct pronunciation. So Wisents sounds like a hard V sound. The letter V does not exist in a lot of European languages. So it's kind of like a V in vine or Venus, and scent, so Wisent. There you go, I learned. There is the interior. We've set up our barriers. Just going to double check that the Wisents can in fact get in and out. They do a little bit of a hop coming out of here because it's not a large enough gap, but they can get in and out, so I am totally okay with it. To dress up our stable, I'm also going to create these feeders. And they're just going to be hanging off of the edge of the barriers, along with a pail so that our animals can grab a drink when they need to. This is of course all fake, it doesn't actually work for the animals, but I thought it was a nice detail. For the barriers, I'm going to be using some, you guessed it, more Indonesian stained timber. I can't wait until the console players have this piece because it will change the way you build anything wooden. I guarantee it. So this fence is based off of a picture I saw from, I want to say Poland, from a conservation park called Białowieża. And the way they have it set up is it's mostly a walk through a forest. There's a bunch of paths that just take you through the Białowieża forest, and then scattered throughout the area are some Wisent enclosures, and there I think are wild boars as well, and a few different animals that are native to that part of the country. It's a very pretty place, and I would 100% go back there one day. Modifying it once more to create a gate that can be opened into this secondary paddock for the Wisents. The way I have this set up is the males obviously can't mix because they are going to fight, but the females could be swapped from one yard to the other, or even the entire breeding herd from one side to the other if necessary. There are two enclosures. The one closer to us right now, the one that I'm setting up enrichment items in, is a little bit easier for guests to see the animals, whereas the other one is quite long and goes all the way to the back of the building. This one I'm going to make a little bit muddier. You can see that there are 3 mud baths, and here I'm hiding the mud bath with some terrain. This is just being pulled up around the edges, and then I'll take the push tool in the center to uncover some of that mud. This is something you can only do if you have disabled animal terrain constraints in these settings. So make sure you do that if this is something you are interested in doing. To meld the mud baths into the terrain a little bit better, I'm going to add some heavy soil, some light soil, and a little bit of sand as well. The Wisents do need quite a bit of grass, so what I'm going to do is put grass underneath the building because that will still count towards their percentages for each type of terrain. And here, once more, I'm just making myself a quick palette to figure out which plants I want to use in here. For all 3 enclosures, it was quite similar. I used the hedgerows, I used the fig trees as bushes, I used ferns, nettles, bracken, and then of course also scattered around a bunch of fallen trees and logs, because that will help to really bring the space to life. I also wanted to hide the enrichment items a little bit better than usual, so I'm placing a log next to the grazing feeder, and around that I actually decided on the swampy reeds. These are not traversable, so I did have to check if the accessibility of the item was changed, but it looks like it was okay. And then I also put the reeds down close to some spaces that maybe are a little bit more wet, more standing water in them, because that's a place where reeds would grow. To make sure that we can keep our Wisents in the barn whenever we need to, I'm going to create some doors using the twilight planks. I've been using these quite often in the last few videos. They are a great piece, and I'm going to add some detail to the door in the form of some very classical barn style X's. And these will be sliding doors, so I'm also going to create sort of a track above the door with a gutter. This one is from the conservation pack, I believe, but you can also use the rectangular gutters because those ones would work totally fine. And just some tool hooks on top of the door to make sure that it can slide from side to side. For the roof, I'm going to do a mix of slate and windows. I did want to modernize this space just a little bit because we are trying to be a state-of-the-art facility, and natural light is always very much appreciated in big buildings like this. And then I'm going to add a second layer of slate to the roof, before adding some additional skylights in this top layer. Recoloring the window frames to a beige brown color just to help them disappear behind the Wisent enclosure. I thought the slate and the breeze block were both quite neutral and they don't take anything away from the animals, and they are not too distracting while still being materials that are believable and easy to clean. Most of all, that is a big thing for barns like this, is making sure the walls and the floors are easy to clean. On the interior of the barn, I set up some support beams so it didn't look like the roof was just floating there. And then along the support beams, I ran some light cables so that we could attach our lights, which I'm just going to steal from our greenhouse. These are some fluorescent lights that I created for the Daintree Conservation Center in SEZ. Additionally, I'm going to add some air conditioning and some ducts all over the place. And on this pole here, we have a small switch that will help us regulate the temperature whenever we need to. It's little details like this that I just love getting lost in. I thought we'd do something a bit different today, seeing as we've added so many things to the zoo in the last few episodes. So here is our restaurant. Let's head right inside. Wow, there are so many people in here. So this is our kitchen. You can sit at the bar. There's a cozy little corner there. You also have restrooms. I really love the stained glass pieces from the Europe pack. I don't think I've ever used them, but I thought that was a pretty good use of them right there. We do have our custom chairs and tables. We have some couches in case you're waiting for a seat, but we're going to skip the line and we're gonna head right on in. This is the viewing deck and also where we have most of our booths. And from here you get a gorgeous view out on the deer park. Just over here we have our second bar. Very English pub style is what I was going for. And here we have our outdoor patio where you can enjoy a bite to eat. Headed right back out, we're going to head down the left side of the zoo. And this is where we will see our deer park walkthrough, which is not just deer, but it is also swans. Here is our entrance. And here we go. Over here is the more open area where you can get glimpses of the animals, whereas here is their more solitary spot. Oh my gosh, what a cutie. So beautiful. As we walk out of the deer park, we see our red deer. Let's head on up to the viewing platform to get a better look. And here we are. All of the deer appear to be over on this side of the enclosure at the moment. We even have a little one already. And finally, as we head over this way, we have our Wisent enclosures. These ones also have little ones already. And you can see them a little bit further over here. That is one enclosure. The second one is over this way. And as you can see, it is much longer, which means it does not have as great of a view of the Wisent as that one, but that is okay. One last stop on our tour today, the Wisent barn. And as the light fades, our lamps slowly begin to turn on. and we can take a closer look at some of these details within the barn. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.